today in my section, we'll be delving into a lot of what Gabe talked about, but like the history behind it. So like you got a lot of like how that history was used to tell the story. In my section, we'll just be talking about like what the history was, the chilling legacy of the Nazi era and its enduring influence on popular culture. The horror of Suspiria and its disturbing connections to the darkest chapters of German history, essentially. A shout out to 3 articles where I got much of my information, specifically The Rotten Wombs of Suspiria by Bad Critic that Gabe spoke of, Selling Motherhood, the Nazi Attempt to Increase the Master Race by the U.S. Holocaust Museum, and finally Suspiria, a German history primer for the confused Suspiria viewer by Nate Jones. And I especially want to thank that last one because that's what led me to all the
yeah, and because we were
yeah and yeah, it just brought me so much context to what I was viewing. And it's what's interesting is most of my college like history stuff like has to do with, or not most of it, but at least a good chunk of it was I covered a lot of Nazi Germany and World War II and World War I and like how that influenced England and the rest of Europe and also Germany. And I never really checked back in with Germany after that. So I was like, I know stuff happened after World War II. I couldn't tell you what most of it was. So yeah, I stopped learning about it afterwards into like modern times, what the heck was happening there.
I will say that not checking in with Germany after a war is what got us World War II. Yeah, because we didn't check in and we weren't like, hey, how you doing, buddy? After that first one, then they cooked up this. So checking in.
Also, they were like, the punishment that was delivered to Germany made it so that they had no ability to succeed after World War I as well. So
yeah,
they
no
were
one
like,
checking in.
Yeah, no one checked in. They're just like, go ahead and die. It's cool. Bye. You'll be able to see the full list of sources that I used. I used like 20 plus. So you'll be able to see the full list if you would like to, some supplemental reading, etc. In our sources section on our blog if you are interested. So part 1 of my section is World War II before Suspiria. So to fully appreciate the depths of Suspiria, we first must understand the historical context that shaped its narrative. The Nazi era left a deep scar on Germany, one that continues to reverberate today, and the film's setting, West Berlin, is a stark reminder of the Cold War tensions and the lingering effects of the Berlin Wall. But beneath the surface lies a more sinister connection, the enduring influence of Nazi ideology. As we see in America, oppression and isms and hatred are not an individual problem, but a systemic one. You can remove the head, but a new one will grow back. And as I said, in college, I did a lot of research on World War II and how Germany transformed nationally from a previously somewhat progressive Weimar Republic into a very conservative Nazi Germany. And World War I has a lot to do with this, but we do not have time to get into all of that. But there were essentially many social shifts that took place post World War I into World War II. Specifically with nationalism and identity, essentially wanting to reclaim pride in being German again, which is what they largely lost in World War I. But that unfortunately transformed into genocidal motivations for World War II. One of the most disturbing aspects of the Nazi regime was its systemic abuse of children. And in an article that Gabe goes through as The Rotten Wombs of Suspiria from Bad Critic, they discuss the harmful legacy of Johanna Herr, a Nazi-era child care expert, whose abusive teachings were designed to break the bond between children and parents, fostering a generation of emotionally detached and unempathetic individuals. Herr's methods, which included isolating babies and discouraging any forms of affection, led to several attachment disorders and generational trauma. Thinking to the parallels happening in the US with parents leaving babies to self-soothe, which was theorized to be one of the main causes of the increase in serial killers that led to many of the anxieties of satanic panic. It all kind of connects. And the text then draws a parallel to the film Suspiria, where the witches of Marco's Dance Academy exhibit similar abusive behaviors. The coven, having survived an oppressive system, justifies their manipulation and control of their students. Honestly, feeling like they pull from Heron's teachings and the cling to power, using that to like wield against the young people who are growing up. It just feels like very intentional. And the film portrays the cycle of abuse and the resulting generational trauma, emphasizing the corrupting influence of power and the perpetuation, I can never say that word, and the perpetuation of violence. Another chilling aspect of the Nazi ideology was its obsession with racial purity. They really took the "I want to have pride in being German again" to "German is the best." And there's this obsession with racial purity. A kind of dystopian manifestation of this was to push women out of universities and society, as well as prevent LGBTQIA individuals from being their authentic selves, and instead have all women or femme-presenting humans be baby makers, or just women with uteruses, people with uteruses, be made baby makers. Kind of very similar to the rhetoric we see from the Republican Party in America today. In the article Selling Motherhood, the Nazi Attempt to Increase the Master Race from the U.S. Holocaust Museum, they explore the Lebensborn program, a Nazi initiative aimed at promoting the birth of racially valuable Aryan children to create a racially pure society. Established in 1935, the program provided maternity homes for unmarried women of good blood to encourage childbirth and adoption by SS families, specifically so that the women would not keep their babies, but that they could use them to have babies and then give those babies to prominent SS families, very much giving a
Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah. Despite the charitable facade, the program was marked by lies, cruelty, and kidnapping. Initially, many SS housewives refused to adopt the Lebensborn babies on moral grounds, a challenge Himmler did not anticipate. However, as the war progressed, more families adopted children to replace those lost in battle. Jeez. And the program's propaganda painted an idealized picture of motherhood, aiming to remove any obstacles to childbirth and stigmatizing single mothers to align with Nazi ideology. Cough, cough, J.D. Vance. The legacy of Lebensborn is complex, with its impact still felt today through the descendants of those born in the program, and the impacts of these programs and ideologies bled into post-World War II Germany that had a generation of babies that were born in these conditions, essentially under these parental structures, and also just like the methods that they used to kind of detach the emotions of the babies and their parents, as well as the generation raised by those who protected these programs and allowed them to exist. Basically like built up and held up these institutions. Jones's article, the primer for German, or the German primer for understanding Suspiria, article provides a historical context for post-World War II Germany, focusing on the persistence of the Nazi influence and the societal reckoning that followed. Jones unpacks that the issues, stating that after the war, while high-ranking Nazis were persecuted in the Nuremberg trials, many lower-level Nazis remained in key professional roles necessary for rebuilding society, such as doctors, judges, and civil servants. This led to a society where Nazi beliefs were still prevalent throughout Germany. For instance, in 1946, 37% of Germans in the America zone, specifically, I think that was, I'm not going to say because I'm going to be wrong. In 1946, 37% of Germans in the America zone believed that Holocaust was necessary for their security. And similar sentiments persisted into the early 1950s. So Jones's article also highlights the delayed reckoning with the Nazi past. It wasn't until the early 1960s that the Nazi era was introduced into German school curricula, which influenced the youth who would drive the cultural shifts of the late 1960s. This generational awakening led to a stark divide between the younger generation and their parents, who had been complicit in or indifferent to Nazi atrocities. This tension is exemplified by Gudrun Ensslin, a founder of the Red Army faction, who saw the older generation as an irredeemable group and advocated for armed resistance. The setting of Suspiria in West Berlin, next to the Berlin Wall, underscores these historical tensions and the lingering impact of the Nazi era on German society.
I will say that even though it was like late that they introduced it into their school curriculum, America still ain't doing that right with their own stuff. So Honestly,
Yeah, they're trying to get rid of it.
you. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, there's still a lot of problems in Germany. I'm not going to say that there aren't, but they, in terms of like teaching about the Holocaust, they have done, as far as like everything I've read about it and learned about it, is like they've made up for it a lot of the ways, and not made up for it. That's the wrong way of saying it, but do teach about it actively so that people can learn from it and heal.
Yeah. It's like fool me once.
Yeah, exactly. So the second part of my section is the historical backdrop for 2018 Suspiria. So Luca Guadagnino's 2018 remake of Suspiria is set against the rich and complex historical context of 1977 Berlin, a period marked by political unrest, social upheaval, and cultural transformation. I'm going to put my glasses on because that'll help me read better. Post-World War II Germany was a nation divided both physically and ideologically. The Berlin Wall, erected in 1961, became the most potent symbol of this division. It separated East Berlin, which was under Soviet control, from West Berlin, which was aligned with the Western powers. That's why they call it the American Zone.
Yeah, so you're right.
Wall, yeah, I was right. Look at me. Okay. So the wall not only divided a city, but also represented the broader geopolitical struggle between communism and capitalism during the Cold War. The Berlin Wall's presence created a climate of tension and fear as families were split and the movement was heavily restricted. This is kind of like what I think the one man was dealing with in the film. Is that Klemper, yeah. So essentially, this division had profound social and psychological impacts on the German people, fostering a sense of isolation and oppression. The wall stood until 1989, when the political changes in Eastern Europe and the decline of the Soviet influence led to its fall, symbolizing the end of the Cold War and the beginning of German reunification. If you think about how recent that really was, the political landscape of today makes much more sense. And the Red Army faction and the German Autumn, which we see like as the backdrop of the film, you see like the events being played in the news. You have one of the girls in the dance company had run off to join them. And like, so just to give you the context of who they were and why they were doing what they were doing, the Red Army faction, also known as the RAF, also known as the Baader-Meinhof Group, was a somewhat radical leftist organization that emerged in West Germany in the late 1960s. The RAF sought to overthrow what they perceived as a fascist state and capitalist oppression, using violent means to achieve their goals. Their activities included bombings, assassinations, kidnappings, and bank robberies. And the German Autumn of 1977, which is when the film is set, was a particularly intense period of RAF activity. It was marked by a series of high-profile attacks, including the kidnapping and murder of former SS member Hans Martin Schleiler, and the hijacking of the Lufthansa Flight 181. The hijackers demanded the release of 11 Red Army faction members imprisoned in Germany, as well as 2 Palestinians held in Turkish prisons, and as well as $15 million as a ransom. These events created a climate of fear and led to significant government crackdown on terrorism. The state's response included increased surveillance, stricter laws, and a broader debate about civil liberties and state power. This response in many ways showcased why the RAF was taking these actions. They're very strict, they're very oppressive in their response to dealing with this activity. So the RAF actions and the state's response had a lasting impact on German society, contributing to a sense of disillusionment and questioning of authority. The period also highlighted the generational divide as younger Germans, influenced by the 1968 student movements and the revelations of their parents' involvement in Nazi crimes, sought to challenge the status quo. The radical left's influence extended beyond the political activism to the cultural sphere, and the 1968 student protests, driven by opposition of the Vietnam War and dissatisfaction with West German government, sparked a wave of cultural and social change. Young people, inspired by the counterculture movements in the United States and Europe, began to question traditional norms and values. And this period saw the rise of alternative lifestyles, communal living, and experimental art forms. The RAF's actions and the state's response created a climate of fear and tension, but they also sparked important debates about civil liberties, state power, and the role of violence in political struggle, like riots, work kind of mentality. The radical left's emphasis on anti-authoritarian leadership and social justice resonated with many young people, shaping their political consciousness and cultural expressions. And this really set the tone of Suspiria, focusing on artists and younger dancers that were being manipulated by the generation that survived and built power during World War II. The reasoning for their participation in protests twisted to be selfish and against what was best for the dance company and the coven. And the ending, where the quiet part was finally said out loud, the truth of what was happening and the history finally out in the open, was ready to be healed from.
Yeah, it's super true. Like the differences between the two generations is really evident. And even with like Patricia, who is the dancer that is rumored and what the girls are told ran off to be this protester and a part of like a radical, right? She was actually going against the fact that they were trying to control her. And she even says like they control every part of her. They took all of these parts of her, even like her womb, essentially, right? And that's just a representation of what that generation was trying to do and trying to maintain and hold. And I think even in the way that the dance was made, so the dance at the end, the Volk, was a dance that Blanc had made during that regime and had, it saved the company, right? We don't know why or what was going on or what about it. But the fact that Susie is continuously trying to do her own version of it. She's always like, no, I want to be on the ground. I want to do this. Like, this is what it feels, this is what I feel. And Blanc is continuously fighting against her to be like, it doesn't matter what you feel, you have to do this. And the fact that Marcos in the end, when she's gearing Susie up for sacrifice, says you have to empty yourself, like till there's nothing left of you so that I can put myself into you. So it's just like no individuality. You have to perform and be what is expected of you, because that's what they had to do. They had to do all kinds of scary things. And now that people are being held accountable, it's scary. It is a scary thing. And so to see them actually get held accountable in the end is really quite beautiful.
Yeah. And like the use of the word Volk is also super intentional. That was from like the Primer article, where they like talk about how like that was the word used to describe the people. It was like their rallying cry under the Nazi regime to like be like, this is what Germany is, this is what it is to be German. So her changing it is like a big slap to the face of that, where it's like German identity is going to change and it's going to be more inclusive, and it's going to, it's going to not be, this is what Germany is, this Aryan race creepy awful time. We can just change it to change who we are and grow, instead of having to be this restricted, awful thing.
There's a big question too, just about the fact that she was American and she came over here, and she came from an oppressive American, like religious, like society that was also controlling her. They also had very specific roles that women are supposed to perform and behave like. And so the fact that she came from that and then came here and then turns out is the future is a big statement. And so I think it's worth, eventually one day rewatching the original Suspiria and understanding and respecting it for what it was. And I think what people need to do is separate these films like it is not like it's not a remake so much as an inspiration of, we took the set dressing of what influenced Suspiria and we made something completely different with a lot of intentionality behind it. And when you see it that way, I think you can really enjoy it a lot more. I mean, hopefully for people who are doing it, but I do know like there are some people who just aren't going to like it, and it is weird and it is long. It didn't have to be that long. Some of it's like, oof. Yeah.
I did look it up. It was 2.5 hours.
No, 2.5. It felt like 3.5. It felt like forever. It felt like my whole life. I was like, it's still going. 2.5. That sounds right. More like 17. Yeah, but that was Suspiria. If you've seen it, again, tell us what you think. It's quite the trip. And I think Dakota did a great job in it. I didn't feel it weird about her acting. She tried to do a lot of the dancing on her own, although like she's not a dancer, so there's only so much you could do with your body if it's not conditioned to move that way at such an age. So, but she did try. She did do a good amount of things on her own, which is admirable. And I highly recommend looking up things about the dances and just about the history. And this is another film that's juggling a lot, where I did feel that. I did feel it was juggling a lot. But I didn't feel as disappointed in its mismanagement of the several themes as I did with Maxine. So, yeah.
It is.
Well, that being said, don't get married.
Delete your kids. And if you have kids, don't leave them alone forever. And like, love them.
Don't let them cry it out, you know?
Yeah, love them and give them affection and care about them. And teach them empathy.
Let's not Handmaid's Tale anybody.
Yeah, that also.
And if you don't want to have kids, that's also cool.
Yeah, do whatever you want.
Dude.
Your body is yours.
Scary.
And even though the country doesn't agree with that, hopefully we get it there eventually.
Be the Susie Bannion / Mother Suspiriorum that you want to see in the world.
Yeah.
But without the murder.
Or, no, I'm kidding.
Oppressive regime? Yeah. Meet demon. That's why I always get so sad after we watch one of those where it's just like, they don't exist.
Yeah.
They don't exist. There's not a being I can call out to. You know, those aren't real.
Yeah.
Fuck.
Yeah.
Give one to the little guy. Anyway.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.